Dear students and colleagues, dear guests, dear Professor Gisèle Sapiro, it is a great pleasure to welcome you to the inaugural event of the Ruperto Carola lecture series in the 2024-25 winter term here in the Great Hall of the Old University. Freedom, freedom. The university as a space for discourse is the topic of our lecture series, a subject of great relevance in view of the dynamics of polarization in society and of restrictions on academic freedom that threaten academics and academic institutions worldwide. Universities have a key function and role in democracy. It is their task to discuss differing, also opposing positions in a manner based on knowledge, open-mindedness, and a spirit of mutual esteem. Through their analytical, critical approach, they are expected to contribute to the objectivity of debates. That is why academic freedom, as freedom to engage in scholarly open discourse, is greatly valued in Germany. It is not to be equated with freedom of opinion, however. Instead, academic freedom means that academics can pursue their research independently and without political influence. Here we appeal to the basic law which says in Article 5, arts and science, research and teaching are free. In light of current conflicts and political developments throughout the world, we wonder and worry about the question of how we can protect our university as a space of open discourse, as a place in which everything may be discussed and elucidated as long as it serves the acquisition of knowledge and this with a scientific approach and an attitude of mutual respect. In times of heated international conflicts, this is a challenge where we need to hold firmly to university principles. After conflicts about a planned seminar last summer, leading academics at the Heidelberg Center for Transcultural Studies have decided, together with the Rectorate, to use the 2024-25 Ruperto Carola lecture series to address the topic academic freedom. This fits also very well with the motto of this year's Science Year, which is devoted to freedom. The Ruperto Carola lecture series of the academic year 24-25 is thus dedicated to the role of universities as a space for discourse, in particular against the background of the current political conflicts, heated societal debates on controversial issues, and growing political demands and expectations regarding academic collaborations with third countries. This lecture series is accompanied by other formats intended for the broader public. For example, the new exhibition, Mightier Than the Sword, Writing Freedom, is currently on display in the University Museum and the event location Betriebswerk Heidelberg. In addition, there will be several concerts with the theme, The Will to Freedom. In the framework of the Science Year, these two formats are receiving joint support from the Heidelberg Academy of Sciences and Humanities and the Federal Ministry of Education and Research. Moreover, Unify, our central unit for family, diversity, equality, and anti-discrimination at Heidelberg University, organizes a symposium with national and international experts on December 4 with the title Lost in Discourse, the Extent of Freedom of Opinion and Research at Universities. I would like to end by thanking Professor Barbara Mittler and Professor Christiane Brosius from the Heidelberg Center of Transcultural Studies, who planned the Ruperto Carola lecture series this semester. Before I hand over to them, I wish you and us all a very enjoyable and stimulating lecture and subsequent discussions. Thank you.
Hello everyone. Und wir machen das mal wieder im Duo und im Dialog. Hong Kong artist Friendly Liu has dedicated this work, created in 2018, to the democracy activist Joshua Wong, And it consists, as you can see, of 3 boxing rings framing 3 Chinese characters. The first 2 are designating freedom. 自 means to the self, and 有 is to follow. So you follow yourself, and that is freedom. And the third, you can easily see, is a human being. The artist explains, I built a boxing ring around the 3 characters. Fenced in by the boxing ring, the first 2 characters become a word that does not exist. Freedom does not exist. And you can clearly see that in the 3rd boxing ring. Fenced in by the boxing ring, the character for human being becomes the character Qiu for prisoner. All of the young people in Hong Kong who fought for their freedom ended up as prisoners. 75 years ago, in 1949, after quite a few years of academic unfreedom, not unlike Hong Kong today, our German constitution re-guaranteed not just academic freedom, but others too. And this anniversary, the 75th anniversary of that constitution, is the background for the Wissenschaftsjahr Freiheit, under the auspices of which this year's Ruperto Carola lecture series will offer different perspectives on the role of freedom in the academe and beyond. Questions of discourse, dissent and dispute, of wokeism and cancel culture, of positioning, polarization and perspective will be discussed from a transcultural perspective.
Coming from the Heidelberg Center of Transcultural Studies, we, that is Barbara Mittler from Chinese Cultural Studies with a focus on protest cultures in the Sinophone world, from their beginnings to the present, and myself, Christiane Brosius, a media anthropologist with a focus on South Asia, India and Nepal, and an expertise in questions of free and shared heritage and open access, we're very happy to take up the invitation to organize this lecture series on freedom and the university as a discursive space. Allow us, therefore, to very briefly give you a little bit of a background to the series, as well as our distinguished speakers. Gisèle Sapiro from HESS in Paris and her dialogue partner, our esteemed colleague from American history, Manfred Berg, for whom we are very happy to welcome them here today.
Now, if we take seriously Rosa Luxemburg, who says that freedom is always the freedom of those who think differently, if we follow Hans-Georg Gadamer when he is saying we will have to learn how to hold a proper debate again, and such a debate must begin with the premise that our interlocutor could be right after all, and if we then agree that research builds on critical minds and in fact thrives with contradiction, it is clear that universities can and probably must play a crucial role in providing a kind of forum for critical dialogue, in offering the open discursive space that is the precondition for fighting what one artist exhibited currently at the Friedrich Ebert Gedenkstätte, where Gisèle Sapiro gave her first talk on right-wing intellectuals in France on Friday, called Ignorance, Ignorance. Freedom in and for the academe means that we insist on the right to know, not to be ignorant. And this is crucial to society as a whole. To keep open for multiple perspectives in this critical dialogue is, of course, not easy at all. And we know of many moments, not just recently, when this has brought our universities to the brink of collapse. The 1968 movement saw Heidelberg's and West Germany's first female rector, Margot Becker-Göring, who in the end gave up on the dialogue which she thought did not work and resigned. Very differently to the exemplary performance we've seen braving difficult times and debates with our current rector, Frauke Melchior. But we must continue to ask, how robust is this academic freedom in view of the many polarizations that we have seen not just recently in our society? How does the university react to attempts at instrumentalization or politicization? Where and how do red lines appear? Who defines them? Who has the power to move or question them? What is the relationship between different claims to freedom? And finally, what is the state of academic freedom in other parts of the world today as well as in the past? What can we learn? coming from the HCTS, which is one important building block in CATS, the Center for Asian and Transcultural Studies, where Asian and Transcultural Studies is taught in more than 18 different disciplines, from archaeology to political science, from musicology to medical anthropology, thus constantly crossing the humanities and the social and the natural sciences, and where we train students in more than 24 different languages. CATS is one of the institutions at Heidelberg University that quite paradigmatically stands for the kind of socially transformative dialogue that Heidelberg University as a whole is involved in, practicing an interdisciplinary approach between different disciplines and between Europe and other world regions, but also practicing transdisciplinarity between the university and the public. We are very much looking forward to this dialogic lecture series, which we have designed in the spirit of our center and the university with a multi-perspectival, transcultural, and transdisciplinary take.
We have invited 6 external speakers. Gisèle Sapiro is the first, Xiang Biao, Eva Illus, Sabanur Shima and Meron Mendel, as well as Sahana Udupa, who will address questions of academic freedom from different disciplinary backgrounds and expertise on different regions of the world, thus providing an interesting and challenging global context for us. Every time we are putting these in an interdisciplinary dialogue with Heidelberg colleagues from different fields, such as Manfred Berg this evening, Guido Sprenger from anthropology, Günter Leipold, English literature, Elisabeth Topkara, sociology, and Sebastian Hanisch, political sciences. For the Heidelberg speakers, the 2 of us will serve as moderators, bringing in our specific Asian regional expertise to their questions of constitutional law, for instance, Professor Reimer from the Faculty of Law, practical studies and engagements, Christiane Schwieren from economics and the Unify unit that was already mentioned for family diversity and equality, and educational sciences, Anna Slivka from educational sciences, that is, on educational freedom and how it plays out in terms of emancipation and diversity in our universities. Our transdisciplinary engagement and our outreach to the public has already been mentioned, and we are happy to provide guided tours to our twin exhibit and the many workshops and performances around the topic of the will to freedom, providing artistic takes on the topic. Hoping to see you all at many of these events. Many, many thanks to our rector, Magnificenz, Frauke Melchior, for the initiative, and to the university, particularly to Marietta Fuhrmann-Koch and her team in communications and marketing for the logistic support. Let us now turn to introducing our 2 speakers, Gisèle Sapiro and Manfred Berg.
So, Gisèle is trained in comparative literature and philosophy at Tel Aviv University, and then in sociology at the USS, at the Ecole des hautes études en sciences sociales. And she's now professor of sociology at the USS and senior researcher at the CNRS, where she began in 1995 and won immediately the bronze medal in 2000 and the silver medal only recently in 2021. She was also even more recently awarded the Humboldt Prize, Research Prize, for her lifetime achievements in 2023, and this is which brings her here for 3 lectures, actually, of which this is the second one. Gisèle Sapiro can be called a kind of pioneer in the field of literary sociology. She's combining in-depth historical studies with innovative methodological approaches. A student of and working in the tradition of Pierre Bourdieu, she's made significant contributions to questions surrounding the connections between literature, law, and politics, and the social conditions that are underlying the international dissemination and literary and scholarly texts. And there are a couple of books that she co-edited that move in this direction. So, for example, The Ideas on the Move in the Social Sciences and Humanities of 2020, and, of course, her Routledge Handbook of History and Sociology of ideas. And as a student of Bourdieu, she is the editor also of the Dictionnaire International Bourdieu, which came out in 2020. In terms of her research that is actually directly relevant to the question of academic freedom today, she is the author of La Guerre des Écrivains, 1940 to 1953, and La responsabilité de l'écrivain droit et moral en France, 19e, 21e siècle, where she speaks about clearly the responsibility of the intellectual in different times throughout the 19th to the 21st century. Can the literary field, Bourdieu's tradition, can the literary field be autonomous, and what does it mean if it actually is? There are other books in this sort of series, Des mots qui tuent, la responsabilité de l'intellectuel en temps de crise, which speaks about the intellectuals in the Vichy regime, and then Les écrivains et la politique en France de l'affaire Dreyfus à la guerre de l'Algérie. And all of these, and I meant to bring the books here, and they're in my bag, and I will hand them around later. All of these books are really concerned from different points of view with the question of how the intellectual, how the academic sphere or the academic field can and should involve itself in society. Then there is another set of books that is very, very important. That's a kind of group that begins with La sociologie de la littérature, so the sociology of literature, translated recently also into English. That is something that you can hear her speak about on Wednesday in the Heidelberg Center for American Studies. And in this context, and sort of hovering between the two, is a very important short essayistic study, Peut-on dissocier l'œuvre de l'auteur, of 2020, where she speaks about the question of whether literature is literature and autonomous or always already political, and what that means. And finally, a book that has just come out, Qu'est-ce qu'un auteur mondial? The book that for us in the HCTS I think also is really, really important because it shows the importance of understanding how different parts of the world are really validated in different ways, and therefore it's not so easy perhaps for a Chinese or for an African author to become an auteur mondial after all. She will be engaging in a conversation with Manfred Berg. And I continue. And Manfred Berg is the Kurt Engelhorn Professor of American History here at Heidelberg University, with his work focusing on the history of African American civil rights movement, race relations, popular violence, and US political history. And you will see when I name some of the books that he's recently authored, that he's, of course, also very good dialogue partner for Gisèle on the topic of academic freedom and freedom in general. I won't mention all the 20 books, but one of them, The Ticket to Freedom, the NAACP and the Struggle for Black Political Integration, published in 2005, Popular Justice, A History of Lynching in America, 2011, and then his new book, Das gespaltene Haus, eine Geschichte der Vereinigten Staaten von 1950 bis heute, which was just published a couple of weeks, maybe even ago. Manfred Berg is, among the many distinctions that he has been honored as the distinguished historian from by the Society of Historians of the Gilded Age in the Progressive Era, and he is a member of the Heidelberg Academy of Sciences. Now, with these two wonderful speakers on the floor, we will open this first session on academic freedom, and I'm very much looking forward to your presentation. Gisèle, thank you very much.
So, es tut mir leid, dass ich nicht kann nicht auf Deutsch sprechen, so thank you very much for inviting me here. I would like to thank first, of course, the Rectorin, and I would like to thank Barbara Mittler and Christian Bossius for inviting me and organizing this conference on a very important topic. And I would like to thank Manfred Berg, who accepted to discuss this presentation. So in views of the increasing attacks on academic freedom everywhere, including in our liberal democracies, it is necessary to reassert its foundation and identify the forms that these attacks take in different types of regimes. Academic freedom is distinct from freedom of expression, while freedom of expression, and the Rectorin said that, is an established human right. Academic freedom is a freedom specifically attached to the university, sometimes criticized and attacked as a privilege rather than a right. There's a strong history of university franchises dating back to 1229, when the clerks of the University of Paris obtained from the Pope the Libertas Scholastica, which protected it from the secular power. Since then, the police is not allowed to access campuses without an authorization of the president of the university. This is true elsewhere, not only in France, of course. Even as a specific right recognized in liberal democracies, academic freedom is often opposed by other rights, as often happens in democracies. We can have rights that are in conflict. So in this case, it can be medical secret, it can be protection of private life, or on the contrary, freedom of expression can be in contradiction with academic freedom sometimes. For example, when faculty professors oppose the holding of extreme right-wing or Islamophobic talks in the university, which happened in France, but also elsewhere. But academic freedom does not mean that one can say whatever they like from the pulpit of a university. So I'll first evoke the foundations of academic freedom, then turn to the attacks it faces in illiberal regimes, authoritarian and illiberal, and then I'll turn to liberal regimes. So academic freedom includes freedom of research, freedom of teaching, and freedom of expression for professors, even when they are civil servants, as it is the case in France, for instance, and therefore, in principle, they should be subject to the duty of reserve. This freedom has been asserted in the face of religious and political authorities and has come to be regarded not as a privilege, but as a freedom necessary for the common good. Academic freedom promotes the development of science and knowledge, which in turn benefits society as a whole, a benefit enshrined as a human right in the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 27. Everyone has the right freely to participate in the cultural life of the community, to enjoy the arts, and to share in scientific advancement and its benefits. In some jurisdictions, academic freedom is considered not as an individual right, but as a right protecting a certain social function that can only be exercised freely. As such, it is protected not only against the state, but also against any attempt to use the academic word for purposes unrelated to scientific research, be they political, economic, or religious. It is therefore accompanied by institutional conditions guaranteeing academic freedom, such as the freedom to disseminate research and the protection of the academic environment. Recognition of academic freedom stems from a number of different traditions. In Germany, it can be traced back to the concept of Universität, asserted by the Humboldt University, combining teaching and research. Freedom of science and its teaching was guaranteed by the Prussian Constitution of 1850, Article 20, abolished by the Nazi regime, academic freedom was re-established in West Germany in 1949. Wissenschaftsfreiheit is guaranteed by Article 5.3 of the Grundgesetz. Kunst und Wissenschaft, Forschung und Lehre sind frei. Die Freiheit der Lehre entbindet nicht von der Treue zur Verfassung. In the USA, a first statement of principle on academic freedom was published in 1925 at the instigation of the American Council on Education. Actually, it was based on a 1915 statement by Edwin Seligman and Arthur Lovejoy for the American Association of University Professors, following an injurience by the Board of Trustees, who obtained at Stanford the layoff of an economist, Edward Ross, because his views were against his own values. The trustee was Stanford himself, and against his values and interests. So this is when they formulated the first statement, and it was reformulated in 1940 by the American Association of University Professors. The common good depends on the free pursuit of truth and its free exposition. So I read the quote in English. Academic freedom is essential to these purposes and applies to both teaching and research. Freedom in research is fundamental to the advancement of truth. Academic freedom in its teaching aspect is fundamental for the protection of the rights of the teacher in teaching and of the student to freedom in learning. It carries with it duties correlative with rights. So there are some differences between this, although the signatories of the first declaration, the American Declaration, they were all trained in Germany, so this is how they brought the concept of academic freedom. There were some differences between this definition and the American one. For instance, there was the Lehrfreiheit was there, but not the Lernfreiheit, so for the students. This Lernfreiheit also disappeared in Germany after in the 1949 reformulation, which was influenced by the United States. So there is an interesting story of circulation of ideas there that should be deserve better, more in-depth research. So in France, academic freedom was enacted by the four law of 1968. And the Savary Law of 1984, and while it is not codified in the Constitution, it is recognized by the Constitutional Council as a fundamental principle of the Republic. By virtue of this principle, academics benefit from a derogation from the status of civil servants, which recognizes their autonomy as that of liberal profession. So they self-organize, they are submitted to peer assessment and not to the hierarchy, and the recruitment is by co-optation. But this derogatory status can easily be curtailed or even abolished by an illiberal government. So, but it's closer to the German framework. Beyond the circulation of the Humboldtian model of the university combining teaching and research, the principle of academic freedom has been internationalized since 1966 through UNESCO, which reformulated in 1997, academic freedom is guaranteed by the autonomy of teaching and research establishments. So the institutions themselves, I won't read, but you have the quote, the institutions themselves have to guarantee this freedom. In some countries, such as Germany, Switzerland, Switzerland's Article 20 of the 1999 Federal Constitution, or Brazil, freedom of science is guaranteed by the Constitution. But this is not the case, for instance, in Canada, like in France, where states are nevertheless free to pass laws. And recently, Quebec passed a law in 2022, an act respecting academic freedom in the university environment. It was proposed and passed following the controversy at the University of Ottawa over professors' metalinguistic use of the N-word. It's Veroushka Lieutenant Duval, who was trying to explain how insulting terms can be reappropriated by the targeted communities. And there was a big debate and scandal. There was also an interesting divide between the Quebec professor who supported her and the English-speaking professors, the Anglophone part, who were against what she did. And I will now turn to attacks on academic freedom in authoritarian and illiberal regimes. In authoritarian countries such as Iran, Afghanistan, and Syria, but also in some so-called illiberal countries such as Turkey, India, Egypt, or Hungary, where Central European University was ousted on the basis of a law passed in 2017 on foreign campuses and went into exile in Vienna with a branch in Berlin. In these countries, academic freedom is restricted by political or religious authorities, or by both. Academics who express criticism of governments or defend freedom of expression are dismissed, publicly harassed, prosecuted, and sometimes imprisoned, including researchers working in other countries, such as Fariba Adelkar, who worked in a research center at Sciences Po and who spent 3 years in an Iranian prison. Luckily, she is now free. Many are forced into exile. Some are hosted in programs such as Scholars at Risk, an international network based in the United States, the Philipp Schwarz initiative of the Humboldt Stiftung here in Germany, and the program PAUSE in France, of which I am a member. The Turkish government has prosecuted as an act of terrorist propaganda many of the signatories of the petition, "We will not be complicit in this crime," a petition against the attacks that targeted the PKK and left 200 dead at the end of 2015. Some were imprisoned, others had their civil servant status revoked and were condemned to exile or to join what started as solidarity academies within the country, but outside university walls. The solidarity academies lack access to online resources. They get some funding from the EU, but had to reconfigure their research orientations. Others continue to work there with restricted freedom, and these conditions, of course, impact on subjects and access to sources and resources. Academics who become exiles remain exposed to threats. An extreme example I would like to evoke here is Turkish sociologist Pinar Selek, who has been prosecuted by the Turkish justice system for 25 years for terrorism, a proven false accusation. In 1998, she was arrested and tortured for refusing to reveal the names of her Kurdish interviewees to the authorities in accordance with professional ethics, which could be compared to medical secrecy and which should be codified by associations. Released after 2 years imprisonment, she undertook an investigation into the masculinist foundations of a nationalist, militarist, and patriarchal political system and the mechanism of threat by which adherence to this social and political order is obtained. She has become one of the system's prime targets because she reveals how it works. Thus, 25 years, Pinar Selek has been persecuted by the Turkish government for practicing her profession as a sociologist. This extreme case risks becoming commonplace. This raises the question of the means of action available to these exiled colleagues and who are exposed to threats and intimidation. Pinar Selek is currently a researcher attached to a laboratory in a French university, but the threats continue. We finally succeeded in obtaining functional protection, so this is which goes to civil servants, although she does not have the status of a civil servant, but when you work for the university, you can benefit from the functional protection. However, the university itself is now being targeted by the Turkish regime. At her 5th trial in June 2024, the French university where Pinar Selek works was implicated by the Turkish Interior Ministry, which pretended to establish a link between an academic conference organized under the auspices of the university and terrorist activities, in a clear attempt to discredit both Pinar Selek and academic freedom as a whole. It is a development that compounds the threats to academic freedom posed by illiberal regimes to teaching and research in liberal regimes. For each trial, a French delegation travels to Turkey with her lawyers, made up of members of her support committee and representatives of professional associations, so the Association Française de Sociologie, Association Française de Sciences Politiques, and also the Observatoire des atteintes aux libertés académiques, OALA, founded by political scientists and sociologists 2 years ago, of which I'm a member of this observatoire. And the 6th trial is due to take place in February in a political climate that has hardened and led the Turkish government to replace the previous judges with ones even more subservient to political power. The support committee and association are currently organizing to attend this 6th trial, and she cannot move from her place now, and she was already not circulating alone in the streets. She cannot go out of France. In France, she's more or less protected, and she continues to publish, and she's very courageous, but you can see how these conditions of work can also prevent researchers from doing their work. Another more recent extreme case brought to our attention a young researcher, Yoni Krznowski, originally from Belarus and working as a postdoc in France, where he defended a thesis entitled « Contester la musique sous régime autoritaire, la politisation du rock au Bélarus ». So it's about politicization of rock music in Belarus, which was published in 2022, so defended in France, published in France. And he was sentenced last July to 10 years in prison, strict regime penal colony. Luckily, he's in France now, following a trial in absentia under the special procedure for serious and very serious crimes applied to prosecute political opponents and dissidents abroad. Along with 19 other researchers, journalists, and activists, he was found guilty of complicity in incitement to social hatred, participation in a conspiracy to seize power, complicity in calls to seize power, and others' action aimed at undermining national security, as well as participation in a group with a view to committing extremist acts. So the board of directors of Sciences Po Strasbourg, where he works, voted a motion of support, and now there is a mobilization to support him. Alongside these extreme cases of accusations of terrorism or terrorist propaganda and of undermining state security, which are also common in Russia, as we know, there are other methods of, such as to put pressure on researchers, such as disciplinary procedures. This is also practiced in Turkey, open threats, and the less explicit intimidation practiced in India and Egypt, where professors have also been dismissed. The restriction of academic freedom can also be seen in the prohibition imposed on researchers to discuss historical facts, such as the Armenian genocide in Turkey. So more recently, the former conservative Polish government targeted researchers working on the implications of Poles in the Holocaust, and this campaign followed the polemics sparked by Jan Thomas Gross, his book on called Neighbors, the Destruction of Jewish Community in Jedwabne, which revealed the involvement of the Polish villagers in the massacre of Jews in this town in 1941. To combat research deemed defamatory and damaging to Poland's reputation, the Polish government dismissed a number of historians and attempted to introduce, it was the former government, in 2018, an amendment to the law on the Institute for National Memory, providing for criminal prosecution of individuals who would attribute to Poles a share of responsibility for Nazi crimes, quote, in contradiction with the facts. And this article was only removed following international mobilization against the revisionist measure. Despite the deletion of this paragraph, Barbara Engelking and Jan Grabowski's book on the fate of the Jews in occupied Poland was sued in 2018, and they managed to find one error about a person. It was a confusion. It was the same name, and so there was the Polish Anti-Defamation League, which is funded by the conservative government, encouraged a heir of the person that was confused to lawsuit against the two authors of the book. A second attack against the specialists of the Holocaust in Poland targeted the conference in Paris, in my institution, at the Ecole des hautes études en sciences sociales, where Jan Thomas Gross was invited as a keynote. And the organizer was subjected before the conference to a lot of pressure to change the guests. And the conference was troubled by persons in the audience who also expressed anti-Semitic insults. While the French Ministry of Research wrote a letter to the Polish minister to complain about this attack on freedom of research, the latter answered that in France, this freedom is threatened by the ideology of political correctness, and that he is well informed about anti-Semitism in France. The president of the Institute for Political Memory also complained that the historians working for the institute had not been invited. While they persecute academics in public institutions, some illiberal and authoritarian governments such as Turkey and India, or it was the case of Brazil under Bolsonaro, support the growth of private universities in order to challenge the autonomy and symbolic power accumulated by professors in public universities. This support is typical of the combination of authoritarianism and capitalism, the control of speech once achieved by the state, and the concentration of the press and publishing industries is now the product of the convergence of political and financial interests. In China, too, there is a convergent rise in the control of university and their submission to the norms of knowledge commodification, to which it is added the control of public discourse by means of algorithms. Economic censorship is a classical means of controlling speech and restricting academic freedom within universities, restricting or withdrawing research funding for certain subjects, cutting funding for certain departments. This method is not specific to illiberal regimes. It directly affects increasingly liberal democracies. In 2009, the British University and College Union expressed its concern at the threats to the, quote, freedoms to research, teach, express, and publish without interference or sanction posed by the way research is funded and evaluated, the managerial approach of research governing bodies, and the pressure for researchers to find sponsors in the commercial world. This is not specific to the UK, as we know, although the experience they experienced their radical form of this management policy. So the social science and humanities are particularly exposed to this kind of censorship for two reasons. Firstly, they are seen as not meeting society's needs. In Japan, 50 humanities and social science faculties have been closed or their activities restricted using this pretext. Secondly, because of their critical tradition. The illiberal Hungarian government withdrew the accreditation of gender studies departments on the ground that they were pursuing, quote, an ideology and not a discipline. In Australia and the USA, right-wing critics of academic freedom use equivalent arguments to delegitimize entire disciplines and research programs for populist ends. So in Florida, gender studies as well as critical race theory were banned from majors program, and sociology was suppressed in the graduation programs of state universities, having been accused of being, quote, hijacked by left-wing activists. These decisions followed the appointment in January 2023 of 6 new board members by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. They also voted to eliminate the Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Office. And these new members of the board are right-wing activists in culture wars over education. They include Christopher Rufo, known as the architect of the anti-critical race theory movement, and Charles Kessler, a member of the Claremont Institute, who contributed to set up the Trump 1776 Commission, who produced a report offering a conservative version of US national history as a response to what is regarded as leftist history. Moreover, the University of New College Library has been purged of books relating to gender studies, feminism, LGBT+, as well as French classics. The upsurge in defense of academic freedom in Germany, Canada, and France in recent years has been directed primarily against wokeism and cancel culture, or even Islamo-leftism, and has served to discredit the university as a place of ideology rather than knowledge. French Minister of Education 3 years ago decided that an inquiry should be done about Islamo-leftism in French universities. All this has, nothing has happened in the end, but the 2020 law on programmation of research, which presented academic freedom as its basis, had an article stating that academic freedom is exerted in the respect of the value of the Republic, which was denying the very principle of academic freedom. This article was suppressed during the debates at the Parliament, but just to show that there is kind of pressure to restrict academic freedom. In UCLA, the pro-Palestinian mobilization of students last year and the violent attack against them by persons who came from outside the campus led UCLA to restrict academic freedom for students and faculty from the beginning of this academic year, and I had echoes from a colleague there. They are not allowed anymore to express their opinions in public without restrictions. Protests can occur only in a very strictly regulated time, manner, and place, while statements, for example, of solidarity are regulated by a new policy that must have a disclaimer that specifies whose views are presented and that they do not in any way represent the university. Finally, research and its dissemination is frequently hampered by companies that do not wish to see facts concerning them divulged. and who take legal action against researchers in law, sociology, or political science, like against, they do the same thing against journalists. So it's called the SLAP, the Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation. For instance, a firm in France attacked a legal scholar just because he mentioned the fact that a lawsuit had been initiated against this firm. That's all. Another case study can be read on the slide here. From the report of the SLAP procedures commissioned by the French Minister of Research in 2017. So this is one example. So you can see the mentioning something about a boat enterprise that was doing things against the ethics could lead the researcher to be prosecuted, to have a lawsuit. Other case, a Brazilian researcher had to go into exile because not only under Bolsonaro, because it's the firms who are menacing her, threatening her, because she was demonstrating in her work how France and other European countries were exporting pesticides to Brazil, so she was facing intimidation and threats. Instead of protecting such researchers threatened by firms, American universities, which fear prosecution, have a policy of preventing lawsuits that leads to restrictions on freedom of research and dissemination of results, and which is being introduced in France and in other European countries with the European General Data Protection Regulation. To conclude, while it does exist, the boundary between academic freedom and freedom of expression is not always obvious to researchers, as the disclosure of results is likely to have a critical dimension towards government policies, the dominant ideology, or corporate policies, and which, while not a matter of opinion, can be curbed by illiberal government. This is one of the definitions of illiberalism, or also, as we saw, by bilious procedures. Similarly, it is part of a researcher's professional ethics to speak out against official lies and denials, for instance, the Armenian genocide in Turkey. For this reason, scholars cannot rely on the state and the law only to protect this freedom. And this is why I think the role of professional associations, academic associations of academics in different disciplines is crucial, both nationally and internationally. And just for further reading, I just recommend these two books which just came out. One is in English, co-edited by Leila Dakli, Pascal Labourier, and Frank Wolf, Academics in the Century of Displacement. And the other one is in French, and it's about, it was done by the CEFRES, directed by Jérôme Heurtaud, about repression and defense of academic freedom in Eastern European countries. But not only, it includes also France a little. Thanks for attention.
Rector Melchior, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor to be included in this event tonight. I will make a brief comment on Professor Sapiro's lecture, and in the spirit of academic freedom and dialogue, I also take liberty to raise a few critical issues. First of all, Professor Sapiro, thank you very much for this poignant talk, especially for reminding us of the legal and historical foundations of academic freedom and of the distinction between academic freedom and freedom of speech. Indeed, it is important to distinguish these two concepts. While freedom of speech covers viewpoints and opinions even if these viewpoints are entirely bereft of logic, empirical basis, and merit. Academic freedom specifically protects researchers in the academic domain and covers scientific and scholarly pursuits aimed at producing knowledge open to critical scrutiny by other scholars. We also need to differentiate between scholars exercising their rights to political protest, which is covered and protected by freedom of speech, and academic freedom. Of course, if lawful protests leads to sanctions against their academic work, the boundary is crossed. 35 years after the fall of communism, there's no denying that academic freedom is under attack. As Gisèle Sapiro has detailed in the first part of her talk, these threats are particularly evident in authoritarian and illiberal regimes. Colleagues in Russia, Belarus, Turkey, and China, but also in Hungary, after all, an EU member state, face serious, sometimes life-threatening repression. Now, sadly, this does not come as a surprise. Dictatorships and authoritarian regimes have always tried to suppress academic freedom, and I'm afraid they will do so in the future. Those of us who have the good fortune of living and working in free societies have an obligation to help colleagues in distress. As far as the repression of academic freedom in authoritarian and illiberal regimes is concerned, there's absolutely no disagreement between you and me, or I would assume anyone in this room. But what about the threats to academic freedom in liberal democracies? In recent years, debates in Western countries have not only focused on the question whether and to what extent government interference with and regulation of scientific research and academic institutions have amounted to the curtailment of academic freedom. Perhaps even more importantly, there's a sharp controversy over the threats to academic freedom that come from below. That is, from students and scholars who have demanded restrictions of academic freedom in the name of justice, progress, anti-racism, and other moral and political projects. Critics argue that under the guise of protecting minorities, the left is trying to impose an illiberal agenda of censorship, while the left retorts that terms such as cancel culture are aimed at discrediting emancipatory ideas. Some of you may have read a very new study read about a very new study on academic freedom that was just published by Die Zeit pertaining to Germany. And that study actually has a lot of good news. I would say most academics in this country do not see serious threats to academic freedom either from above or below. Now, this is not to say that all is good and well, but there have been salient cases of both governmental interference and pressures from activists. Moreover, and I might say that as a historian of the United States, the culture and campus wars that are raging in America may be, as they often are, a harbinger of things to come. I hope not. Since I've only read a draft of Gisèle's paper, I do not wish to jump to conclusions. Yet it seems to me that she sees academic freedom in liberal democracy primarily threatened by governments and private corporations. And she certainly has a point that funding decisions by governments and corporate sponsors are often influenced by political objectives and financial interests. I guess we all know that. However, I would like to raise the question if such I like to play the devil's advocate every now and then. So, not everyone will like this. Whether such considerations are necessarily illegitimate and amount to the encroaching on academic freedom. Researchers who accept funding from corporate donors usually know that strings might be attached. In my view, the issue here is not so much academic freedom, but transparency. Government funding obviously involves question of legitimacy and authority. Given that resources and money is always tight, I think that democratically elected governments have the right to set priorities. Of course, funding cuts are always painful, we hate them, and I guess we have every right to fight them politically tooth and nail. But they are not per se an assault on academic freedom. Needless to say, there's also often a fine line between fiscal and political considerations. As far as academic threats from below are concerned, they are not a new phenomenon. In Germany, and in Heidelberg for that matter, we have good reason to look back to the Weimar era, when nationalistic students, often with the approval of like-minded professors, harassed pacifists and leftists. This experience, I believe, should serve as a reminder that academic freedom requires strong institutional protections as well as a vibrant culture of vigilance. By way of conclusion, therefore, I emphatically second Gisèle Sapiro's admonition that scholars must always be in the first and the last line of defense when it comes to academic freedom. Thank you. And of course, I'm extremely curious what you have to say.
Thank you very much for the response and for taking the time to read the draft I sent you and to respond in a very argumentative way. So, no, I do think that governments can have policies that are dangerous for academic freedom. I'm not even speaking on the principle of funding research, fundamental research, with no principles of priorities that would be for the utility, the pseudo-utility of the discipline or the domain in question, I think is very important. And we know that the hierarchies that are made are not always based on real utility. For instance, you know that in science, in medicine, we know that everything, gynecology, is totally underfunded, and the research there is totally backward regarding the real problems and necessities we have. So the hierarchies are not only a matter of utility, there are some political priorities, and so I think the academic community can argue and say we need funding for our priorities and not the government priorities, because this is the principle of fundamental research, and without fundamental research there is no applied research. Applied research cannot exist in itself. It's just the development, the consequences of fundamental research. And we saw in France, for instance, in the pandemics, that there had been research that had identified the virus at the Pasteur Institute 2 or 3 years before the pandemics, but they didn't get funding to be able to develop this research direction. And then the firms, I was not speaking of firms who fund the researchers, and I was speaking of researchers who just do their job of studying what firms do, and sometimes saying these firms are not respecting the laws, the ethical laws regarding either their workers or their clients, and they hire legal lawyers to combat any attempt to reveal their operation and these things. I totally agree for transparency, and I think it's really important. I'm at the HESS, but also at the CNRS, and the CNRS we do reporting every year of our activities, and we have to. And I've never been against that. I think it's different transparency than the kind of management. There are two different things: transparency and the kind of management that is now applied to universities, and that is not fit to universities because it's a model that is coming from the consulting firms, and they have a kind of standard model of management. We saw that it does not apply to hospitals, it does not apply to public service in general, and it's also the result of a kind of ideology that is threatening all the public service, including the universities. Regarding the students, and I want to answer that. So for me, the students are part of the universities. The Freiheit is for me something important. I think that students are not in the university just to receive the knowledge passively. They are part of the discussion, and if they respond, they can respond. They don't have also to have to be submitted to offending things. So it can be extreme sometimes. I agree in the United States. I have not encountered that in France, never in my classes, and I don't know stories about that. There can be, and also the notion of cancel culture is very problematic. It's something that was coined by Donald Trump, and which includes, yes, and that includes very different things, very different things. So it can be the discussion about authors that are either abusive or having being racist or being so. I think, of course, these things should be discussed, and the cancelling these works is not necessarily the solution, because I think it would also erase the symbolic violence that was there. So I argue that in my work that Barbara kindly cited, but I think this needs to be discussed in agreement with the students, and I know professors in the US who do that, and it works. It's not always, it's difficult, I know, but it's also we're in a movement of reaction to some things. And I do not back everything that is going on, but I think the discussion with the students is something very, very important. And under this, there are different things. So I have a colleague, which I respect very much, Olivier Beau. I had invited him when at the Wissenschaftskolleg we started a discussion, a blog on a conference, and then a blog on academic freedom, because he has been, he's a legal scholar working on the foundations of academic freedom. But one day, I mean, he wrote a book based on that, but he evoked some cases. And one of the cases he evoked as an attack on academic freedom was the fact that a law professor in Paris, at the Sorbonne, had said about marriage between homosexual marriage. He said, yes, and next time, in the future, we will allow marriage with animals. And then there were protests by students on the network. And he says, oh, they shouldn't contest the word of a professor. But I was reading that, and I said, in my knowledge of law, you know, you need marriage based on consentment. So it's not a legal reasoning, correct legal reasoning. He said he was just developing a legal reasoning. And it was not correct, and himself, he arrives to this conclusion 10 pages afterwards. But so you see, in this question, I think that the fact that students react is a good thing. Why not? I mean,
well, there's no disagreement. I think at this university we are all striving to engage our students in free academic discourse. But I'm not going to answer your various points one by one in the interest of opening up to the audience. What I would like to emphasize, however, is that where we do have apparently a certain disagreement is when it comes to our concepts of academic freedom. I have a more narrowly tailored concept, and I'd like to, which I think goes back to what you said at the outset of your talk. We need to distinguish this from political speech. For example, that last example that you gave, if someone makes an argument about same-sex marriage, that's fine. I'm for it, but I respect religious conservatives who say, in my view,
this is an opinion.
It's abhorrent. Now, a professor may say this, but in that particular situation, that has very little to do with academic freedom. That's political speech. And I'm a dyed-in-the-wool Weberian, as my friends know,
so
and we need to distinguish between our roles when we speak as scholars, when we claim that we present empirical and theoretical arguments that are open to critical scrutiny from scholars as well as from students, or when we make a normative speech about the things that we believe in, the things that we want as citizens being enacted in politics. Now, in terms of what may governments do or what they should do, again, what I see here is government like to do a lot more. They should fund universities endlessly. I'm all for it. Nobody in this room, I guess, is against it. This is preaching to the choir. But we can fight for it politically. As citizens and as scholars, we may step up and say, well, if you don't do this, face the consequences. We are contributing to the common weal by doing that research. But quite frankly, if the government does not conform with my political wishes or my individual interests as a scholar in a liberal society, I would not necessarily see this as an assault on my academic freedom. Academic freedom is, as soon as government tells me, Professor Berg, you have to teach a certain version of history, as you mentioned the Armenian genocide. So I think I have a narrow...
So you think that the fact that 50 departments of humanities and social science in Japan were closed is not a problem of academic freedom?
It is. It might. I'm not familiar with the circumstances, and I'm not saying I'm not naive. I know very well that Mr. DeSantis has a political agenda, and that the right-wing extremists in the United States, who are unfortunately in the process of taking over government again, that they're having an agenda. But when talking about academic freedom, I would...
so the fact that gender studies was suppressed, or sociology, you think is not an attack on academic freedom?
It is, if there's a if you can demonstrate there's a political agenda behind it, which probably is, which probably is, and if they shut down. But in the United States, we have the particular... and I'm not familiar with the legal situation in France, but in the United States we have the particular situation that state universities are extremely dependent on state governments, which can often be quite reactionary, in fact, whereas private universities do not extend. They are fairly free in what they do with when in cases of disagreement with their scholars.